Welcome to the Calm Cockpit Podcast, the show that helps pilots think clearly, stay calm, and perform at their best when it matters most. Each episode delivers practical strategies, real-world aviation wisdom, and mindset tools that help create confident pilots and safe flights.
In aviation, we train for emergencies, but we rarely talk about one of the most challenging realities we all face: grief, loss, and mortality.
Whether it's the sudden loss of a colleague, the death of a loved one, or even the loss of a beloved pet, grief can affect judgment, focus, and performance in ways many pilots don't expect.
Today, we're joined by Nikki Smith, the death doula. She's a grief coach and also a host of a podcast called Good Grief to explore how aviators can navigate loss while staying safe, resilient, and grounded.
You'll learn practical tools for managing grief in the cockpit, supporting others through loss, and understanding why grief isn't something you get over, it's something that you learn to carry.
So settle in and join us for this important conversation on grief, healing, and what it means to be fully human in aviation.
The Calm Cockpit Podcast starts now.
Onyx 12 Mike Oscar, runway 27, clear for takeoff.
Welcome, everyone, to today's episode. I'm Geeta Brown, licensed yoga and meditation educator and music educator with over 30 years of experience in teaching high performers how to improve their lives, but without adding stress. And I'm also a midlife student pilot.
And I'm John Niehaus, corporate pilot and flight instructor. I'm really grateful to be having this conversation. It's been a topic that we've been talking about for a long time now, right?
We have, and we were also talking about we really need to have someone help us navigate this conversation because while grief is a very human experience, John, you and I have talked about many times we need a professional to help us navigate these waters a little bit.
I need an adult. Grief touches us all, and when the loss is a fellow pilot or a crew member due to an accident, sometimes a student, you just never know in aviation, unfortunately. It's especially important to support one another and share these kinds of resources.
Yeah, I was really happy to reach out to my music therapy colleagues and say, please send us someone. And luckily, we struck colleague gold. A colleague of mine connected us with Nikki, and Nikki was a match for the Calm Cockpit from the first moment we spoke with her. She is a death doula and grief coach. She's served the terminally ill, the dying, the elderly, and their loved ones to help them navigate this end-of-life transition, and also for those of us that are left behind. She's out in Columbus, Ohio, close to my Midwestern roots back in Chicago, and she's really driven to her commitment to give back to the community and help those who are suffering with grief and loss. So she also volunteers in her spare time in local hospice and serves on a board of directors for Let the Light In and the Funeral Consumers Alliance of Central Ohio. And as we mentioned in the show opening, she hosts a weekly podcast that is devoted to destigmatizing grief, and it's called Good Grief with Nikki, the death doula. You might be wondering, what is a death doula? Don't worry, she's going to give us a great definition in the episode. And another reason to absolutely love her is when she's not helping others, you will find her backpacking deep in the woods. She's a tremendous guest.
Yeah, it's crazy. She talks about this in the episode, but the dichotomy between a birth doula and a death doula, and I'll be honest, I didn't know what either of those things were for the longest time. And when we had our first child, our only child, my son, we actually did go the route of having a birth doula. And basically, it's just somebody who helps you kind of in that experience, and they've done it so many times, so they know kind of the ways to have a successful and as chill of a birth as you could possibly have,
Mhm.
if you could call any of it chill, really. So it only does make sense now that having talked with her about what a death doula is, that you would have that kind of help at the end of your life experience as well. And I know that that's kind of a weird thing to talk about, but it just makes a lot of sense. And she seems very passionate and very good at what she does. And so there's lots of helpful information, and this is an important discussion for the aviation community, and we'll have that with Nikki shortly. And Geeta and I will see you on the other side of this interview. We'll talk about our key takeaways from this discussion with Nikki, the death doula.
Nikki Smith, welcome to the Calm Cockpit.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, we're so glad to have you lead us through this discussion today.
Yeah.
Let's just kick it off. Tell us a little bit. What is a death doula? What do you do? What do us people need to know about this whole framework that you operate with?
Yeah, happy to answer that. So,
Thanks.
a death doula, the quick little elevator pitch, we provide the non-medical and more holistic support for people who are at end of life, terminal illness, chronic disease, and their loved ones kind of navigate all the ins and outs of end of life spaces. So that's the emotional work, the practical support, a little bit of the, grief support as well. I also do grief coaching. So I work with people who already suffered significant losses in their life to help them understand the grieving process, which is different for everybody. So that's a super short version. Basically, most of the people I personally work with have had terminal illness, be that cancer, COPD. I've had kidney failure, heart failure, all of those people who are kind of exploring maybe stopping treatment and understanding what the dying process looks like. So I will educate them and their family on what to expect. We'll write their death plan so that their final months, weeks, days, and hours can go exactly how they want it to be. Because as far as I know, we only die once. So I want people to have the most beautiful and spiritual experience with that as they possibly can. Yeah.
You did a great job with an elevator pitch, because I imagine there's a lot to unpack, which is why we're getting into this whole episode today.
Oh, yeah.
We do think a lot about birth plan, right? But not everyone considers their death plan.
And that's just it. I was just at a conference last week. It was a full spectrum doula. So there were birth doulas there too. And we talked about planning, because that's part of being a birth doula is you have your birth plan, but you never know when things could go all upended in the last minute. And you have to pivot and have somebody on hand that can keep the room calm, make the pivot, make the adjustments, and keep everything as close to plan as possible. So we do very much the same thing.
And then a really important piece too that I hear you talking about is helping those that are left behind, which is really our focus today. We're really sort of circling the conversation primarily around us aviators who have lost a fellow aviator due to a tragic loss in an accident, which is a very unique form of grief. So I'm sure your experience of helping people navigate the grieving process, that's why we have you here. Yeah. So what would be for a pilot who has experienced that like immediate, sudden, and tragic loss? Mm-hmm. What are some of the things that they might expect to find just in that initial phase? I'm talking like the initial days or week. Mm-hmm. What are common things so that we know that these responses are normal and to be expected, and that it's okay that we're feeling that way?
There's no one way anybody's going to feel, first of all.
Yeah.
So however, they would respond emotionally, above anything else, just understanding however you respond is how you're going to respond, and that's okay. No matter if you're feeling, I hate saying it, but this happens when it comes to situations of survivor's guilt. Sometimes there's a feeling of relief. Wow, that wasn't me. Mm-hmm. And then immediately the guilt of how could I think that I just lost somebody close to me, or I just lost somebody in a situation I could have very well been in as well. But understanding that that's okay if there are no good or bad emotions. Emotions they just are. It's what we do with them and how we respond to them that makes the difference. So there's no way of saying how you're going to respond to it. But within the initial days after a traumatic loss, or hours even, there's a lot of obviously shock, right? Like, oh my gosh, what happened? And it takes a while for our brain to remap our synapses without somebody in it, especially when it comes to a sudden loss. We're used to that person being there. And our brains are used to that person being there. There's those like muscle reactions of calling them or seeing them in the hallway that our brains take a while to remap to not see them, not make that phone call to them every day. So there's a lot of shock and confusion right out the gate. And survivor's guilt is a huge one. I've seen that with traumatic losses before of why not me? Why them? Why did it go this way? And it's perfectly natural to question those things.
Thank you for sort of normalizing that.
Mm-hmm.
How can we tell the difference then between, resilience and honoring our emotions and when we might suppress? Because I know something, John, that you've talked about is that pilots, that we have to compartmentalize, particularly for people like you, John, who are flying professionally. I know you said once that your dog died and then you had to fly, right after you heard that news. So you have to compartmentalize to do the mission. I'm thinking particularly of military aviators as well. I mean, you have to do the job. So how do we tell the difference between like emotional suppression that's unhealthy versus resiliency? Because I think it's a fine line.
Right. Well, if you're not actively flying or performing your job or in a place where you need to kind of compartmentalize that and you're still doing it, that's obviously a problem. If you're just never looking at your grief, never dealing with your grief, never facing it, and you're constantly just packing it away in a box, that's when the problems come in. The only way to we don't get over our grief. Grief is with us forever, right? And it just changes form, it changes shape, and we learn to live with it instead of against it. But if we constantly avoid it, it's like holding a beach ball under the water. When you're swimming, it's going to pop up and hit you in the face. So it will come out, and it'll come out in bursts of anger, irritability, inability to do the job effectively after a while because you're not dealing with that grief. I don't know if that answered your question, but
it did. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, avoidance is a wonderful thing because it gets us through the day.
Right.
But then it gets us into trouble. So this is another, sticky thing for particularly professional aviators is the fear of the loss of the medical certificate. So if an aviator does go to a mental health professional and says, I'm struggling, with the grief process, et cetera, and then receives a diagnosis, there can be real impacts to maintaining your medical certification. And if that gets revoked or held back, then you cannot fly. So there's this culture of careful finding the right people that you can disclose to without feeling like it's going to impinge your medical. But what most of us would need, I would expect after a tragic loss, would be to talk to a professional.
Yes.
So I love people who do jobs like you, a death doula, someone who's in the field, but a little adjacent to the mental health community, and perhaps not a direct reporter. What other resources do you think there are out there for pilots who maybe don't quite meet the criteria that they need to speak to a psychologist or a counselor, but they're looking for some support and just a place to go where they can open that vault a little bit, but feel secure and comfortable in doing so, knowing that they're not going to be labeled as having a disorder because they're going through a grief process? Who can they turn to?
Yeah. Well, there's support groups, obviously, and I've seen some that are virtual online. And what the nice thing about those is, depending on the group and what their rules are, you might be able to leave your camera off or even change your name so you can be completely anonymous and just talk to people without that label of your face and your name. But I would hope there are support groups locally too, to wherever that person might be that they could attend. And my gosh, wouldn't it be amazing if there were support groups just for people in aviation? Like, shout out. If somebody wants to do that, I think that would be a fantastic idea, because like if I were in a support group with somebody, a pilot who just lost a co-pilot or a friend or coworker, I wouldn't necessarily know how to identify because I'm not a pilot. I can understand the grief. I can appreciate, where they are with their grief. But again, support groups are always a lovely place to go. And there are I don't want to say non-professional, but they're non-counselor grief coaches like me out there. You can talk to grief coaches. You can talk to death doulas. Hopefully you have a trusted friend you can talk to or relative, clergy. A lot of people go to clergy when they're suffering, if they have a religious affiliation, whatever that may be. Those are usually fantastic resources. Most churches have support groups too, and they'll let anybody in. They won't say you have to be a member of this church. So those are great places you can go just to get another level of support.
Those are great resources. Interestingly enough, right down the street from me is a lovely organization that was developed by a couple after they lost their son in a tragic accident. And it's all about supporting people through all different levels of grief. And they have a memorial walk every year. And just doing that in honor of a loved one, just getting together with other people, not necessarily needing to unpack all the grief and talk about it, but just to be with other people who kind of get it is really nice. And I used to really resist support groups, people. I'm telling you, when I was in my 20s, I was like, don't show weakness. Don't say what you're suffering from. from, because as soon as you do, right, everything's going to fall apart. But when I went to some of my first support groups when I was going through my divorce, I was like so relieved to be in a room with people who just understood what I was going through. This was related to substance abuse disorder in my ex-husband, but this is just to say that I'm someone who resisted it, thought it was a little load of bunk, that it was going to make me weak, that I was going to get pulled down by a bunch of negativity. And it was actually the opposite. Once I got over myself and went into that room, it really helped. So if you're someone out there who's resisting it, take it from Geeta, try it. You might be surprised. It's such a relief to be with people who understand you.
Most of the time in situations like that, you're not mandated to speak. And like you said so eloquently, sometimes just being in the presence of other people who get it is all you need. You don't have to share, but just knowing you're in a safe space where your grief will be seen and held, even if you don't express it verbally or physically or anything, that can do worlds right there. And Al-Anon, like I went to Al-Anon for years, still go on occasion when I feel the need. And even just when I'm not worried about, or I'm not having any type of effects of, I also had an alcoholic former spouse. And if I'm not feeling the effects of that, but just being in that space feels good to me sometimes because I feel held and accepted. So yeah, thank you.
It's very easy to get in the mind spiral and think that our suffering is unique and that we're doing it wrong or something. So I think that might especially hit aviators in like that medium term grief process. So maybe they've gotten through the initial shock and they're somewhat reorienting their life. So like I'm thinking especially high profile accidents that we have. The news cycle moves on. The memorials are over. All of those ways that we have of holding each other end. What would you say to an aviator who's now in that murky middle, right? They're now going back to work. No one's talking about it anymore. What can they be doing for themselves to support themselves in that sort of medium term care? Because as you said, the grief never goes away. We just change our relationship to it. So what types of things could they do for themselves supportively?
Well, don't be afraid to continue to ask for help, even if it's been 10 years. Again, there's no timeline for grief, and you may still feel the effects of it many, many years down the road. So just first of all, knowing and understanding that, right? That, okay, it's 6 months. Why am I not quote unquote over it? Other people might say things like, wow, you should be over it by now. Again, there's no getting over it. So just understanding and giving yourself some grace that you don't need to get over it, right? It's okay to continue to grieve that person months, years, decades down the line. And if you need to continue to reach out for support, please do. If you need to take time to honor that person, if there's something you want to do at the beginning of your flight to honor somebody that you've lost, you know, whether it's say a prayer, have a token or totem or something in your pocket that you just touch, or some way that you can just say, I still feel you. I still miss you. I still grieve you. You're here with me in this moment, and I can continue, you know, to go on from here having you with me. So it's okay to continue to honor that person.
That's beautiful. I love including them into your life. I talk to my dad all the time. He passed now almost 2 years ago. And I'll be like, Dad, did you see that landing? That totally rocked. But how can we tell then, Nikki, the difference? Okay, so someone's kind of gotten through that initial just period that is so, as you said, it's like your brain is literally remapping itself and maybe a little bit through the murky middle, but how can we tell the difference then between, okay, I don't feel like I'm quite getting over it. Other people are telling me I need to get over it. How can we tell the difference between, I actually might need to speak to a mental health professional. This is towing the line now towards a little bit dangerous for me. What are some signs that we might see in ourselves? Or if we know a pilot who might be going through this, what are ways that we can talk to them and say, hey, I might be seeing these signs that we might need a little additional support?
Well, if it's impacting your life, right? If it's impacting your daily life, you can't fly, you can't do your job. Those are two huge signs right there. If you're having panic attacks, when you get into your plane and do whatever the pilots do to start the process. Sorry, I'm not a pilot. But if you're going through that process and you start to get the sweaty palms and the heart racing, that's a good indication that you haven't dealt with something, whether that be your own anxiety or your own grief or whatever that may be. So those are some huge signs right there. So again, not being afraid to ask for help. And that's so easy for us to say. It's so hard for people to do, to ask for help. Can't say I know much about aviation, but I've spoken with men who have more blue collar jobs, work in that type of industry. There's a machismo with that. And from what I understand, there's a little bit of that sometimes with aviation as well. There's this, stiff upper lip. Men in general have that stigma that they have to man up and hold it all in and be stoic and be strong for the other people. And it's a sign of weakness to not allow yourself to feel those emotions and be a little soft when you need to. So if you're finding yourself just constantly unable to do your job or panicking or having those reactions, then that might be the time to reach out and ask for help.
It's an interesting point because for us, we've got kind of two sides of the same coin here, because we have our aviation side where, as Geeta pointed out, a lot of times that is sudden and tragic. And there's an old adage that says if you're in aviation long enough, you will see a friend or a coworker pass away because of aviation. So there was a gentleman that I used to know through my previous job who I wasn't very close with, but I knew him. And him and his wife unfortunately passed away in an airplane accident a couple months ago. Even not knowing him very well, the suddenness of that, the tragicness of that is like, oh my goodness. And like you pointed out early in the interview, you think about it and you go, it could be me. He didn't do anything wrong. It was a aircraft malfunction, and that can happen on any airplane. In my case, with the airplane that I fly, there's so many redundancies that those aren't quite as big of a concern. But when you start getting into some of the smaller airplanes where it's got one engine and you just hope that it works. Yeah. But then on the flip side, we have our normal lives too. And regular people have people pass away for normal regular reasons. It's that balance of, I know at some point I'm going to have somebody I know pass away early because of this, but then I'm also going to have all the same things that everyone else has. We are very good as an industry in recognizing that that does affect performance, which is one of the reasons, why we wanted to talk about this today as well. So for example, in my previous position, my grandfather passed away. I was notified while I was pre-flighting my airplane. In uniform, passengers were there. We're getting ready to go. I walked in and told my chief pilot and said, hey, this just happened. Without question, before I even finished the sentence, he said, go home. And that is an industry standard from a professional pilot standpoint. Now, when you are in a Geeta's role where you're flying for fun, like you have to make that decision yourself. And there's a conversation there as well of knowing what your limits are and knowing what's safe and being able to tell yourself no. In my case, the decision was out of my hands. It was go home. So you have that, and you also have the bereavement that comes with it. But the difference between us and, say, an accountant, and I'm not bashing accountants, but you're not going to have a life-altering accident sitting behind a computer doing whatever it is that accountants do.
Right.
In my case, at some point, I have to go back to work.
Yeah.
I can let myself feel, I can be sad, I can do all these things. But if that process takes, like you said, it could take weeks, it can take months, it can take years. At some point, probably after about a week or two, I have to go back to work.
Right.
And there's that pressure of I can let myself feel all day long until my vacation days run out. And then I have to decide what I'm going to do. And how do I work past that, even if I'm still feeling it, to be a safe and professional aviator?
Well, and we talked early on, we mentioned compartmentalization, and that's something that's okay from time to time, right? You have to. Like, I very recently lost my mother. 11 years ago, I lost my brother. So I've had these huge griefs while I'm supporting people who are at end of life. I was with somebody within a week after my mom dying, her mom was actively dying. I could have let myself fall apart in that moment and say, I missed this up because my mom died suddenly. Her death was unexpected. I had this vision that I would care for her all the way up until she was very old and at her end of life. And I'm not going to have that now. And I was watching somebody else have that. And I could have easily been mad, walked away, but I was able to just tell myself before I even walked into her house, I sat in my car for 5-10 minutes, took some deep breaths, and I just said, I love you, Mom. I'm going to honor you and I'm going to grieve you until my last day, but I'm going to set you aside for a minute because I need to be present for this young lady and her mom. You can find a ritual that might make sense. Some people having a physical ritual, like having an envelope and you write down the word I'm grieving, fold it up, put it inside the envelope, seal it, and put it in your pocket. So it's there, but it's not open. You can continue to focus on your work. And then when you're done, you can take that envelope out, open it up. Like if there's a physical thing like that can help you compartmentalize that and just quote unquote, put it away, put it on the shelf. I had a therapist once who worked with me on things like this where we would have an imaginary box and I would open it and I would take all the feelings and manifest them into either colored balls or shapes and put them in that box and close it and imagine putting it on a shelf where I can still see it, but it's up there for right now so that I can focus on what I need to. And then later I'll bring the box back down again.
That is awesome advice. I've recently been playing with this idea too about compartmentalization, and that it's actually healthy and really helpful as part of the grieving process. Like after my father passed, it was really nice to go back flying again, but I certainly didn't do it the week or two after he passed. Like that was not going to happen. But I think 3 weeks later, I said, to your point, John, it's time. I'm flying for fun, but I still turn very crabby if I don't get to do it. But I was still grieving him, and he used to fly airplanes. So, all that starts to come up for you. And so I tried that thing that you said of compartmentalizing, and I just said, I'm just putting it, for me, it's always a book on a shelf because I love to read, putting the book on the shelf. And what helps me with that is then saying at 7:00 tonight, I'm going to take it off the shelf and I'm going to do some yoga, and I can feel whatever I want to feel then. But until then, I'm just going to fly the airplane, have dinner with my husband, and give myself permission to sort of take off the grief backpack for a few hours. But I think that can bring a lot of guilt up for people. Do you see that they feel like guilty that they're not grieving, that they're not feeling bad? Is that a normal thing?
Oh, yeah. Guilt comes along with so many because we feel like we're supposed to grieve a certain way. And when we don't, then we feel bad about it, right? Like we're supposed to be really sad, and then we're supposed to be stoic and all these things we're supposed to. And we don't, we feel guilty. I see this with caregivers who lost somebody I've been working with after they've been terminally ill for years, and their person dies, and they have a sense of relief. And they're like, how can I be relieved my person just died? Of course you are. You're not dealing with that anymore. The suffering of the caring and their illness is done. It's okay to feel relief. You can still feel sad, and you will, but it's perfectly natural to have those types of emotions.
I would imagine, and we've heard this, John, I think from a few other pilots, that a lot of the big airline companies are really good at supporting their pilots when things like this happen. They make resources available. Absolutely. They don't just say, get over it and slap them on the back and get out there and fly again. They really
do. Good to hear.
Yeah, they do take care of their people. But from a death doula, what do you wish the head of flight crew management for like a major airline knew? What would you tell them? These are the ways that you can support your crew members, your support staff after a fatal accident. What do you wish that they would provide for people?
So first of all, most companies, I've come from a corporate background, and we always had EAPs, the Employee Assistance Program, where if you had a loss, it's like, here you go, you can get some free counseling for like 10 sessions. I'm hoping they have things like that available. Here's some free support for you, whatever you need to do. But if I could sit down every business owner, every company owner in the world and just help them to understand that A, this isn't going to be gone in 3 days. There's a whole 3 days bereavement thing in the corporate world, which is bullcrap. B, we can't say who is family and who is not. If somebody was just, not just, but a coworker, that could be every bit as devastating to that person as if they lost their own brother, right? So we can't be putting labels on who the loss is, but also we can't put a time limit on it. We can't say after 6 weeks, then resources are gone. Have ongoing support. And I've spoken with people who specialize in working with grief in the workplace, and they tout all the time about having modifications for employees for weeks, months, even a year after a loss, of letting them take a reduced caseload if they need, letting them have that cash in that, hey, I need a day off, even though it's been 6 months. I need a little time for myself right now. Or, maybe I need somebody to take over this meeting for me because I don't think I can run it today. Just understanding that grief is still going to be there. And even though it's been 6 months, you can't roll your eyes and say, oh my God, I can't give you special stuff right now. Have some modifications if need be. Some people might want to come back to work quickly. When my brother died 11 years ago, it was like 3 days in. I took the whole week off after I found out. And like 3 days in, I called my boss. I'm like, I need to come to work because I need to do something besides sit and think about this. And she was lovely. She said, you can come in. I'll give you an office in the back. You don't have to sit at your desk. Do whatever you need to do. Leave whenever you want to leave. And that was a beautiful thing she gave me, because she could have said, you're not allowed to come in here because you're on bereavement. She was like, yeah, absolutely. You do what you need to do to make you feel better today. And I came in and I worked for 4 hours and I went home, and it was amazing. So just giving people some allowances to go the way they need to go to work through it.
That is beautiful. I think we need to put you on the board of every major company in the United States, because you're so right that it's ongoing. And, I keep referencing my father, which was a very expected passing, and he was elderly. So very different than what we're talking about. But man, it does affect you. One thing that I've really noticed that has shifted from the time when I was a little kid is religion, and you mentioned spiritual life used to feature very heavily in the grief process and still does for a lot of people, but for way less people now than it ever used to. That used to be like the holding vessel for those tender emotions for even the most stoic person. You could go to church and it was okay if a little tear came down your cheek. And we had these rituals, and I feel like we've lost a lot of that in our lives, a lot of that richness. Are there any other resources? I'm thinking of, a more stoic pilot, could be male or female, because we certainly see it in the military, that need to suppress beyond support groups. What other types of things, maybe in the self-care realm even, would you suggest for aviators to do just to support themselves in that more like long-term grieving process when the hurt isn't quite as bad? What other things would you suggest that they do to give some access to those tender emotions?
Yeah. Sky's the limit with things you could do. I'm a huge advocate for journaling. I love journaling. And you don't have to have a fancy notebook and a fancy pen. And you don't even have to keep the journal. You can write it on just a scrap piece of paper. Write out all the things you're feeling and read through it again. And then if you want to tear it up, throw it away. Great. If you want to keep it, keep it. I love writing those feelings out. Sometimes just being outside and reconnecting with the world around you to remind yourself that you're part of a larger spectrum of beings, that does worlds for me. Even just going out on a small hike, which if you're physically able, go for a small hike, go somewhere outside. But above all, meditation and grounding. I think I spoke your language. And I say that, and so many people get this vision in their head of you have to sit very still in lotus pose, the palms up, and you have to be silent. No, that's not what meditation has to be. Meditation can just be sitting in a chair, it can be your lazy boy, lay on the couch, lay on the floor, lay in your bed, whatever you want, you can do it standing up, but just quiet yourself and connect with the room around you. Feel the floor under your feet. There's a lot of great breathing techniques out there you can do as well. But just reminding yourself that you are a human being in a body sometimes, because when we have all those big feelings, we tend to sit up here in our heads. We get stuck up there, and it can get real nasty after a while. I've been there. I know what that's like to just be up here, and I just forget. I get that tunnel vision. People talk to me, and I don't hear it. But to just take a step back and connect with the floor, the desk, the chair, that wall, whatever you need to do to remind yourself that you're a human being in a physical space, talk to another human being.
Yeah. I just saw something really cool. It was a neurologist the other day, and he posted a study about journaling and talked about the difference between typing your thoughts and feelings versus handwriting.
I read that same. I think I read the same one.
Was it Josh Turknet? He's a neuroscientist.
Yeah, it was.
Josh, if you're listening, we're trying to get you on the show. Answer my email, man. And it was all about how writing by hand helps your brain to encode the memories and make sense neurologically of your experience in a way that doing it by computer doesn't. It has something because it forces you, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, that it forces you to slow down a little bit and to encode and integrate memories, thoughts, and experiences into your neural network in a different way that speed doesn't do. Is that what you took from that study as well?
Yep, that's exactly it. I actually teach a workshop on journaling with grief. Once I read that study, I bring a copy of it with me and I quote stuff from it.
We love a good study to be
I do. It's just to be validated, and handwriting is so important, because that's exactly it. It slows you down and it gives you more time to really connect with those thoughts.
I really resist journaling even to this day, even though I'm a writer. But when I sit down and say I'm going to write 2 to 3 pages just in a notebook, longhand, stream of consciousness, I'm not saving it. I don't care what it says. I'm just dumping. I'm amazed at the negative junk that comes out, because I think I'm a fairly positive, happy person. I love life. But the stuff that comes out when I write by hand, I'm like, I was carrying all that around, all this subconscious garbage, stored grief, stored trauma, something that someone said 3 days ago that's been rattling around in there. It's a transformative process.
Now you don't have to carry it anymore, because it's out of you and on paper.
Oh, it's so great to tear it up and throw it away. It feels amazing. Done. What types of things do you see with people? So talk to me a little bit more about journaling with grief. Say there's a pilot listening and they wanted to do it, but they're staring at a blank page. They just feel, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Do you use prompts? Do you use timed things? What way could they start if they wanted to give it a try for a week?
Well, you can find prompts. If you just Google search journaling prompts, you can find a billion of them right away. I'm happy to send some out as well. I have some beautiful journal prompts you could do for specific moods too.
We would want yours, Nikki. Come on. We don't want any random Google junk or ChatGPT junk. If you would share some with our audience, that would be amazing because people sit here journaling and they go, I don't know what that means or even how to do it.
Yeah.
So if you could give a guidance, that would be great.
Well, and honestly, like, don't push yourself too hard on it. Some people get so paralyzed by a blank page. Like, I want it to be perfect. Don't be perfect. Just, you don't even have to use punctuation. You don't have to write sentences. You can write bullet points, but just start writing. And literally, if you start writing, I don't know what to write, and you just write that over and over again, eventually be like, this feels silly. And I feel silly because I should be writing about, and then you start writing about what you're writing about. So just write literally anything. Nobody else is reading it. This is for you and for you alone. So I know the blank page can be so intimidating, but just start writing.
Here's where I struggle with this because I've tried it.
Okay.
Full disclosure, I do think that some of the times that I've tried it, it has helped. But when I see the prompts and it starts asking you like, okay, what are these things? It's like my brain feels like it has to be positive. And then I write it down and I reread it. And in my head, I'm like, you're full of crap. Like, you're trying to hit this point of like, oh, you're positive, you're upbeat, you're looking on the bright side. You don't feel that way. You just feel like you need to write it down that way. How do you overcome that like fakeness that can come out?
Well, first of all, and thank you for admitting or not admitting, but, being vulnerable and saying, I feel like I have to be positive. And I think some other people struggle with that too, but I always encourage to write the negative, write the worst things you've been thinking or feeling, because those are the ones you feel bad about, right? Mm-hmm. Geeta was saying she tends to write out all the negative. But when we get ourselves in that spiral, we're stuck up here in our heads and we're in that negativity spiral. If you start writing it out, like write out I'm feeling I can't get over this grief. I'm a terrible person. I'm an even worse pilot because I can't get past this and I can't compartmentalize it. Write it all out and then put your pen down and go back and reread it, because I promise you, when you reread it, you'll read it and think, who wrote that? That's bullcrap almost immediately. That's why I love having people write out these negativity bias feelings, because it's easy to think it, but once you see it, because if your best friend came up to you and started saying all those things to you, you'd be like, buddy, it's okay. I'm glad you shared that with me, but man, take it down a notch. You would think that, right? You would have those thoughts. And if you're reading that of yourself, you can say, okay, I was having a bad moment. That was a lot. I feel better now.
That's good, because I mean, in the past, one of the reasons why I've felt like I had to skew that way is that whole, like, you write it into existence, right? Like you have you write in that positive thoughts, and then you're trying to get that tranquility that you're writing down. And then the problem is you're looking at it and you're writing it down and you're like, I don't believe this.
Right.
And then it doesn't help.
Right. And there is so much research out there on gratitude journaling, because practicing gratitude and recognizing gratitude it really genuinely does alter our mindset after a period of time. However, it's not always easy to do. Some days you're like, I don't want to feel grateful right now. I'm mad. I'm angry and I'm hurt. And that's when you write out all the crap, write out all the bad thoughts. And then, if you want to, when you're done with that, turn around and write something that you're like, I'm grateful I was able to write all this out. I'm grateful for this pen in my hand. It can be that small.
So I have a lot of questions. So I feel the idea of holding that beach ball below water, because I feel like that's what I do. For those of us that are prone to that, sometimes you don't even know you're doing it. You have your bereavement, you take your time, you do all the things that you feel like you're supposed to do. And let's say in aviation, we love what we call scenario-based training. So it's like you paint this picture, like, what would you do? Right. So in our case, let's say you have a pilot who had a family member pass away and they did all the right things and they think that they're good. They climb back into the cockpit and let's say they're, 2 hours into a 5-hour trip. And all of a sudden that beach ball starts rising up. Like, what can pilots do in the moment who legitimately thought they were being safe, and all of a sudden something starts surfacing that they're going, I can't pull over. What do I do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, take a deep breath. I love grounding techniques, right? So you can do some simple grounding and this might be difficult in a cockpit, but I always tell people if they're having a panic attack or they're having that moment of, say out loud, list off 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And just taking that second to look around, like, all right, there's a panel over there. There's a red light over there. This carpet is blue. A cloud is white. Like just naming off 5 things brings you back into the moment and out of up here. Because when we start to panic, we come up here again, brings us back into our bodies, back into the present space. And again, breathing techniques are fantastic. Square breathing, 4 counts in, hold 4, out 4, hold 4, or even staggered breathing of like 4 counts in, 7 counts out can regulate the heart rate, bring that back down again. Anything you do to kind of recenter yourself. And then once you get past that panic moment or the beach ball just hit you in the face moment, go ahead and honor that. Say, okay, I had a grief moment. I had a grief burst, grief storm, whatever you want to call it. I'm feeling this. I'm hurting right now. I need to get through this. And when I get to wherever I am, I'm going to take a moment and feel this. But right now I'm going to focus on XYZ. So, and hopefully if you have a co-pilot there with you, tell them, I'm hoping you have that relationship. If you're flying a plane together, I hope you have a trusting relationship to say, hey, I'm struggling in this moment right now. Can you talk to me? Let's talk about sports or whatever. Talk about our kids or dogs.
I was flying one day solo. It was after my dad passed. I was pretty well through the grief and doing okay, but I was just going out to the practice area just to do some maneuvers. And I got out there and it was like all of a sudden my thinking was fuzzy and it was like I was thinking through mud. Like the simplest things, just holding altitude. I was like, I'm struggling. What's the procedure for slow flight? I don't know. It was like my brain was going do do do. The number you were trying to reach has been disconnected. And I was just so I just did like slow turns. I was like, maybe it's just I'm flying solo. I'm still relatively new. Let me just do some gentle turns, just hang out in the practice area. Nothing's going on. I just need to get, my sea legs back. And I just could not shake it for whatever reason. I am completely overwhelmed right now. The simplest thing I am struggling with. And I was like, I'm here by myself.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? So I did something very similar to your 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, although I just kept it as a pilot to flying the plane. So, my feet are on the rudder pedals. I'm on airspeed. I said my altitude. I'm at 3,500. I'm east of North Central. I'm north of our airport. I just oriented myself. Here's where I am. Here's what I'm doing. And then I said out loud, I'm struggling right now. My cognition is garbage. And I'd say, okay. And I just said, I'm here alone. Do I want to get on the radio and call for help? I said, I'm not that bad. I'm just going to go home. So I just, luckily I was like 10 minutes from home and came back and landed. Yeah. And my instructor said, hey, what'd you do today? I said, nothing. Realized that I was overwhelmed and came back and landed. But looking back, yay, good decision. Looking back, though, that was grief. It was just, I was doing better. I had been flying. Everything was fine. But I think, sleep is a little disrupted still in a couple months after. Who knows? It just, I don't think I'm necessarily holding a beach ball down because if anything, I get a little, let me process endlessly at some point. Put your butt in the seat. Let's go. So, but, it just came up. But in that moment, that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 for me was just very simple. What we say, aviate, navigate, communicate. Just fly the plane, narrate the steps, but saying out loud to myself, I'm struggling. Cognitively, I am not thinking clearly, but I can think clearly enough to get myself back home. And I did a fine landing and it was okay. But being up there solo, it's a different experience when you have that grief fog just kind of occur. But that's where you can rely on your training. So I think sort of integrating your 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 5 things you can see, 4 things you can smell, integrating that into a checklist and just kind of orienting yourself and keeping it very simple. It was a non-event, but can happen. So I want to encourage anyone else, if they're out there flying solo, like we do in general aviation, have a plan ahead of time. And I think because I do all these practices on the regs, just in everyday life, I can notice that I'm struggling and I can kind of talk myself through it. Yeah. So it wasn't a panic attack or anything. It was just brain fog.
Having something you can fall back on, like a checklist, right? Yeah. And that's something you can practice. Even if you're feeling great and you're on the ground and you're having a good day, like think ahead a little bit. I have a flight tomorrow. What can I do if I start to get that? And then have mantra or a checklist or something you can run through. So if it does hit you, it's okay to feel that feeling. But if you can't feel that feeling in the moment, try to look at it objectively, like, oh, that feeling's there. Okay, it's sitting there. I see it, but I'm in this moment right now. And here's 5 things and go through your checklist.
Cool.
It takes practice.
It does. It does. That's why I'm very glad that I have all these practices that I've done ahead of time because I think it served me well in that moment. I want to talk a little bit about identity and mortality in a moment, but I want to loop back to something I mentioned earlier. I have a question for John. You had told me ages ago that you got the notification that your dog had passed. I believe you were on the West Coast, right?
It was in Vegas.
You're in Vegas. Oh, well, it should be fun, but not. So you were flying professionally. You got the call. Like, how did you handle that? And what advice would you give for other pilots?
Oh gosh, it was the worst. Yeah, I had left that morning to take some passengers to Vegas. We had an overnight. So we were there for one night and then leaving the next morning. I had just checked into my hotel room and my wife had called me and said, "Hey, I'm taking the dog into the vet. There's something wrong." He basically died on the phone. The moment they brought him into the vet, it was like they brought him through the doors and the dog was like, okay, at least it's not at home. It's the combination of the event itself. It's the combination of not being there. It's the combination of family members who are feeling all of that even much more severely because she had to be there. And so there's a little bit of that disconnect, a little bit of that guilt of like, do I have it better because I didn't have to witness it? Or did I miss out because I didn't witness it?
Right.
You know, I was there with a crew and the other pilot that I was with was very understanding, of course. And I mean, he was a huge dog person too, so he knew what was going on. I mean, ultimately the responsible thing is he flew home. So I was able to put the gear up and down and have conversations and things like that. But that afternoon, I basically said, I'm out. So I kind of checked out in the hotel room and did my thing. But yeah, I mean, it was tough. I can't imagine what that would feel like if that were a spouse or a parent or a sibling. I mean, we feel for dogs and they're part of our family, but it's a whole nother thing if it's a child. So do I have any tips? I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you react to it. It's so much in aviation is less about the flying and learning to say no. You know, no, I'm not right. No, I'm not okay. Yes, I know that the passengers need to get there and I'm the only one that can bring them back, but I can't. And there are some times where a company will say, okay, if you can't do it safely and you're being honest, I mean, there's no punishable offense in that, and they'll send another pilot. That just means that the other pilot has to airline out to where the airplane is and the passengers get told, you're not leaving tomorrow, you're leaving the next day. Sorry.
Right.
But then there's also that fine line of, can I still do it and get home and then take myself off the schedule? And I don't have a right answer for that. Like you said, everybody processes things different. Everybody handles things different. Certainly if you can be in the right seat, which generally speaking for us, the right seat is the pilot not flying. That is always going to be the safer way to do things because you just don't know what's going to happen. You know, we made it back without any incidents, you know, no issues. Like I said, I was able to work the radios without too much of an issue, but it's not a fun experience. And certainly it's not easy. You do have to have a amount of honesty with yourself.
Sounds like you were honest with your fellow crew members though, which is good. You didn't just try to fake it, you know, and be like, oh, I'll just really compartmentalize and not even tell them what happened, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's my coworker said that I needed to write a country song because within the same week, my dog died, my grandma got cancer, and something happened with my car or something. Like there was like three main things, and it was just like one punch to the face after another. And he's like, man, you really need to like write a song about this or something. But yeah, everything comes down to CRM, crew resource management, and that understanding that if something's going on with you, especially if it's something compromising, the person sitting next to you needs to know. Yeah. Because their butt's in the seat too. And if they're not watching you for those kinds of signs of, hey, I'm not okay, then they're just going to assume that everything's fine and they may not be paying attention. So having somebody there to say, hey, I think I'm fine, but just if I start to speak, you know, incorrectly or not hear things or do things that are different, like you need to know, that's the point where you put your foot down and say, no, it's my airplane now. There's that. And I'm blessed in the sense that from a corporate environment, we know the people that we fly with. There's only 8 pilots. At an airline environment, it's a whole nother thing because you may fly with a different pilot every day. And you may never fly with that same person again because the airline is so huge. So you don't build up that rapport and it's more difficult to have those discussions. You've never met that person before. Do I feel comfortable enough to say to this person who I'm meeting in this moment, like, hey, I'm kind of messed up because my wife died? That's a very difficult thing to talk about.
Sure. As a passenger, please, I would rather my flight be delayed or canceled altogether than have a pilot who is not at full capacity flying that plane. I'm not a pilot. I know nothing about aviation, but I do have to fly from time to time. And as that person that's sitting in the back, please
The nice thing from a passenger standpoint is that that's where the you don't have a choice thing comes in, especially at an airline. There's so many pilots. They're all over the place. They are in predictable environments where, like, I'm in Detroit, I'm in Minneapolis, I'm in Dallas. There's so many pilots floating around those major hubs. It is incumbent upon the pilot as part of their standard operating procedures that if this happens, I have to tell somebody.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to get in trouble if I tell somebody and take myself off the schedule. I will get in more trouble if I try to hide it and do all the things.
Yeah.
Because the airline does not want you there.
Right.
So
Good.
from a passenger standpoint, the protection is in there where the airline says, you need to tell me. I will immediately take you off. There's no harm, no foul. We as a corporation are protecting the general flying public and frankly you from yourself.
Yeah. Thank you. That makes me feel better.
But most pilots are generally pretty good about it. It's that 5 hazardous attitudes is what we call it, where there's certain things that pilots do that, you know, you have to constantly combat. And one of those is get there-itis or get home-itis. If a pilot is in Dallas and they live in, I don't know, Houston, or Houston's not far enough away, in LA, and somebody just passed away and the pilot's like, okay, if I tell somebody, they're going to take me off the flight. The next flight is getting me back home. How am I going to get home now? And it's going to take me extra time and I need to get home now. The fastest way for me to do that is to do my job and get home.
Right.
That is the most hazardous way to look at it because your brain's not in it. Your brain is already at home. Mm-hmm. And so that's where in primary training, and Geeta, I'm sure you've been talked to about the 5 hazardous attitudes. Those things are so real. They sound extremely like, oh, I would never worry about that until you're sitting there and it's midnight and you're tired and you have a wife who's called you 12 times because something bad happened at home and I got to get home. And that's when things happen. So it's that constant vigilance of, again, being honest with yourself and then following the process of, am I safe? Do I have to report this? Should I report this even if I don't have to? How do I get back?
I think I'm hearing, John, as a general aviation pilot myself, we have our things called our personal minimums that we write out ahead of time. So it's our protections, like airlines, as he said, have the standard operating procedure, instant bereavement, you're taken off, no questions. With me, we write these hoping that we will follow them and then give them to friends and colleagues to check us on that. But I don't know that I've seen anyone yet in their personal minimums write about if they have a bereavement or have a grief process, if they have sort of a mandatory putting myself on a hold for at least a week until I even consider going back to the cockpit. Then I'm going to check in with my friend John and I'm maybe going to call Greg and check in with them to make sure, get their perspective that I'm okay and fit to fly again. So I would encourage general aviation pilots, think about it ahead of time, knowing, as you said, Nikki, every type of grief is going to be different. A dog passing is different than a spouse, than a child, than a catastrophic loss. But having this as part of our standard operating procedure ahead of time so that we're not making a decision, to your point, John, under pressure at midnight. The decision's already made because it's written down in our personal minimums. And we said, I have a mandatory, like I don't fly for 2 weeks, no questions asked. I'm not going to argue with myself. It's just the rule. I think that's, to your point, Nikki, that's like an element of healthy compartmentalization. It's like giving the grief a bucket to exist and live in and saying that it's real and it's valid, and then having ways to check in with it down the line as we consider flying again, especially in a small plane like that I will be doing, mostly flying solo. Or I'll have people with me, but they don't know how to fly. They're not much help. They're just a distraction. They're like, go fly over my house. Whee! So let's talk a little bit about mortality. And I'm thinking now of like flight instructors. Flight instructors, and John, you can probably speak to this better than I can, but you guys are carrying that emotional weight of knowing you're training somebody. Once they get their private pilot certificate, they may never have to take another certificate training again. I mean, they have to get recurrent training, but as a flight instructor, you're responsible for giving them like the keys to this kingdom. How do you carry around that emotional weight of knowing you can't control every future decision that they make? I want to hear from you, John, and then from you, Nikki, is like what you wish flight instructors would consider about this sort of feeling of mortality, because, it's more risky for me to fly an airplane generally, a general aviation airplane, than it is to sit here chatting with you guys. So how do we handle that risk of mortality in what we do?
Well, and that's the other side to this coin, right? And as instructors or check pilots or examiners, there is that extra level of responsibility. And when we talk about about the idea of if you stay in aviation long enough, you live to see someone die. For instructors, it's almost even more common because we do have that touch point of training all of these new pilots, or in some companies' cases, like I might be a training captain, not just for new hires, but I may be responsible for the decision that allows someone to go from a first officer to a captain. So that's just like training somebody, but you're giving them even more responsibility because if they're a captain on a transport category airplane, now they've got a ton of passengers, not just maybe one or two seats behind them. I don't know if it's necessarily so much the weight of the responsibility, although there is some of that. Like my main concern is inevitably, and I hate to use that word, but if and or when something happens and you find out that you were their instructor or you did give them like a flight review or some sort of additional training, or you were the reason, like an examiner, you are the reason why they have a certificate because you passed them on that one day that you flew with them. You didn't even train them. You flew with them for like 2 hours and gave them, like Gita said, the keys to the kingdom. When you do find out that that person unfortunately had a bad day and ended up in a bad situation, now there is that responsibility, that guilt of, well, I trained them. Could I have taught them something that would have saved them? Or did I unfortunately teach them something that wasn't correct? All of those what ifs that weigh heavily on you, like, did I contribute to this in a roundabout way? Like, that's huge. And instructors feel that all the time.
I can't imagine how that feels. Obviously, again, I have no experience in aviation, this field at all. But obviously, my first instinct with something like that is give yourself a little bit of grace. You're an instructor for a reason. You must be really good at what you do. I would imagine in order to instruct, you have to be a really daggone good pilot. Humans make mistakes. Humans have bad days. You can't cause somebody else to have a bad day. You can't cause somebody to make a mistake. I mean, you can, but if they're up there on their own, you've already finished with them. You didn't make them make that mistake. So cut yourself a little bit of slack, but that's easy for me to say. Really easy for me to sit back and say that, right? Of course, you're going to have those feelings of, wow, did I teach them something incorrectly? Did I do something that stuck with them that they made this mistake? Of course, that's natural for you to feel that. But to just remember that you're not God, so to speak. You're not the person that forced their hand to do something incorrectly. But go ahead. Again, we're going to go back to journaling. If you have those what ifs, write them out. What if I said XYZ and that's why he did ABC? Write that out and then go back and reread it. And again, it's that negativity bias. You can be like, wait a minute, there's no way this caused this. Sometimes just releasing yourself of that by getting it out on paper can be a huge help. Talk to somebody about it. Try to find somebody to talk to release yourself of that guilt, you know? Sometimes just letting somebody else see it, witness it, and look at it can get it off of your plate. You know, I'm happy to look at your guilt. I'm happy to look at your shame and hold that with you for a little while. I'm sure there are other people out there as well that would be willing to hold that grief and hold that guilt and shame with you so it's not so heavy.
The other piece to this that I think people struggle with, and I think a lot of people are probably reluctant to admit it, but it's there. From an instructor standpoint, if you have a student who gets their certification and something happens, there's first that initial emotion that we just talked about, which is, oh my gosh, my student's gone or former student is gone. The other side of it is, oh no, I was the last one that wrote in their logbook. I'm going to get sued. The family is going to look to me because anytime these things happen, so often it's that shotgun approach from a lawyer that's like, I'm going to sue the examiner, I'm going to sue the instructor, I'm going to sue the aircraft manufacturer. Even if it's not their fault, something will stick. It's not necessarily that the family or whomever is out to get you per se. That's just the way sometimes these things progress. And so from an instructor standpoint, you've got the fear of, am I going to get sued or am I in trouble, mixed with the, I can't believe this person's gone and I'm sad about it. And so then there's that guilt of, why am I worried about myself when this person just passed away? And so it's that weird dichotomy of self-preservation and sadness.
Yeah, that's perfectly valid to have that. Again, it's that survivor's guilt or that feeling of relief when your person has finally, lost their battle with cancer, so to speak. Of course, you're going to feel a little bit of relief. And of course, you're going to have some survivor's guilt. And it's okay to think and feel that, but don't hold on to it forever. Again, find a way to release yourself of it. Talk to somebody about it. Give yourself a little bit of grace.
My husband always says, though, a problem shared is half a problem. And I will be consistently amazed by when I hold on to things like very light additions of what you're talking about, John. Just things I'm feeling guilty about, or like even just ashamed that I have that thought, or a thought spiral. And I'll just be like, I'll go in and I'll say, I don't need you to say anything. I'm just going to thought spiral at you for a minute. And I go, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I can hear how nutso I sound right now. He's like, yep, you're spiraling. I'm like, that's all nonsense that I just said. He said, it's nonsense. Go back and study. What are you doing? But just saying it out loud and having another person be like, yeah, that's pretty much nonsense. Okay, you're good. You're absolved. It releases, where if I hadn't said it out loud to someone that I trust, it would still be rattling around in my brain.
Our brains love to hold on to that negativity and just
don't they
justify it all to heck and back.
Don't they, though? And then it becomes like our definition of who we are.
Yeah.
So part of this whole life thing, I feel like it's a little rigged, Nikki, which is why we need you as a death doula. Like, we have our birth doulas and our death doulas. Like, we're born to die. We pop out of mom, we take a big breath and then a lot of breaths in between. And at some point, however it happens, we exhale the last breath. How would you, we've talked a lot about risks inherent in aviation and the unique grief processes that can occur here on all the different levels. What are healthy ways for pilots, new pilots, asking for myself, to process that reality that life is never risk-free, but that we can still have good decision-making, but handling that, inherent risk, that this life is a rigged game? What kind of perspective can we give ourselves on that so we don't get bogged down by the what-ifs?
I speak with people all the time on death anxiety, especially when I have new clients I'm working with that now have an expiration date closer than they anticipated. It's scary. But to remind ourselves that literally every single one of us is going to die one day. Mortality rate is still 100% for human beings. It's just how it is. But if you look at that not as a bad thing, like, nobody really wants to die specifically. Maybe some people do. But if you look at that as your reason to continue living, like what's the whole point of life is that it's finite. We can make something right now. We can make moments right now. I'm not saying you have to sit and think about your death every single day and constantly say, well, I'm going to die one day. But knowing that you have that end date makes everything that happens before then so much more valuable and so much more precious. Because it really is cliche, but it does go so fast. I had a client who was 103 who said this went by so fast. All right. And for me, 48-year-old me, 103 sounds like so far away. But if I get to that point, I'm sure I will have the same thought that, man, this went so fast. Understanding that makes right now so much more important and so much more beautiful. Enjoy that flight. I've flown as a passenger. I've never piloted a plane, but I imagine that must be the most amazing feeling in the world to be up there with birds and soaring around in the sky. Take a moment to say, holy crap, I am flying. I'm sure if you've done it a million times, it gets rote. It's like driving a car for me. But to take that moment to say, I'm up here in the sky. How many people get to do this? Just remembering all those beautiful moments in between.
Great advice. I have one kind of wrap-up question for you, and it's a little different tack than we've taken because we focused a lot on the pilots.
Yeah.
How can pilots talk to their spouses, their children, their friends about these risks of flying? And particularly for me, general aviation is, some people compare it to the risk of a motorcycle, more risky than a car, but not as safe as commercial aviation. But even within commercial aviation, catastrophic things happen. So how can we speak with our loved ones without creating fear or emotional distance in them, but talk with reality about these risks and the deaths that can be associated with our passion?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me that. So
good.
The reason why I'm so glad, I have crippling flight anxiety. I am full admission. I was afraid to admit this on this podcast, so I'm sorry to the pilots listening out there. I am absolutely terrified when I get on a plane. You have no idea. Several years ago, I live in Columbus, Ohio, and John Glenn International Airport offered a one-day seminar on flight anxiety. And I got in, and it was the most amazing thing I've been through because they explained to me how flight mechanics worked. They explained to me how aviation works, how planes, I knew a little bit about how planes work, but just knowing the basics made me feel so much better. Because part of that anxiety is the unknown, right? I'm not going to be the one flying the plane. I'm putting a whole lot of trust in another human being to do this for me, for something that is, to me, horribly complex. But to understand a little bit of it was a total game changer. I'm not going to say I'm calm as a cucumber on a flight. I still get scared, but it's easier for me because I understand what's going on. So even just taking the time to kind of explain, like, what I do is a little dangerous, but here's the mechanics that keep me safe. Here are the things I do that keep me safe. Here are the things that I do that keep the passengers safe. Like, just giving that little bit of understanding of the mechanics of it, that did worlds for me. That would be my advice.
Knowledge is power.
Right?
Nikki, you're in good hands because I got into flying because I had a crippling fear of flying. So
Really?
be careful because you might be in flight lessons before you know it.
That might be the thing to do it for me. Who knows? I just need to fly more often, I guess, too. But
I have one last question for you.
oh, okay.
And it's taking a different spin on this. And we've talked about this on previous episodes. One of the things similar to doctors and lawyers and some of these other sort of high pressure, high power careers, pilots identify as pilots. When you can't pilot anymore, it's almost like a death.
Yeah.
Whether it be you lost your medical, and that is sometimes a immediate loss. It's something happened in your life, or you go to the doctor finds something and they go, nope, your medical certificate's gone. There's no warning. There's no lead up. It's just out. Or you lose a job, or any of these things in between. The grief that comes with the inability to pilot anymore, assuming it's not your decision, is like a death.
Sure.
Is there a difference in the grieving process for something like that over a life form, for a better way to put it? What does that look like in terms of the process? Is it the same?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked me that, because I tout this all the time. This is what I talk about on my own podcast, is not all grief is death related. There's a big umbrella term called disenfranchised grief, and that's the griefs for non-societally recognized losses, like losing a job, losing your identity. And you just said two of those that could potentially happen to a pilot. First of all, the process can be exactly the same. Absolutely. Losing your identity is huge. That is a loss. You've lost yourself, right? And I totally respect that. If I suddenly couldn't be a death doula anymore, this has become my identity. This is who I am. Like, I don't know what I would do if I couldn't be talking about death, dying, and grief, which sounds weird, but absolutely treat it like a death loss. You can mourn it. If you need a ritual, have a funeral for it, right? There was a young lady I saw on TikTok years ago or a while back. She had to have her arm amputated and she had a funeral for her arm. It was tongue in cheek. It was a little funny, but it was also like, I lost an arm. She needed that ritual to grieve it. So if you need to do something to recognize that loss, don't just sit back and ignore it. First, step one, understanding it's a grief. And you've suffered a loss and you're grieving that loss. Honor that. Do what you need to do to work through that grief as well. And don't be surprised if you have the irritability and the anger. Those are two big ones I'm sure that will come up. Don't feel guilty about it. Your feelings are yours and they're valid, but take time to honor those and take time to grieve it like you would grieve a friend or a spouse or a parent when they pass away.
That is fantastic advice. What was the name for that?
Disenfranchised grief.
I'm going to remember that. I think that gives a very nice container to hold some of the very complicated things that often get sort of passed over, to John's point. Just get over it. Just move on. Just get over it instead of really recognizing that as a distinct loss. Yeah.
And don't ever let the it was just don't take the word just out of that, because that's where that falls in. Like, it was just a pet. It was just a job. It was just a, there's no just. Grief is grief. And if it's impactful to you, it's impactful to you.
Brilliant words. I'm so glad you came on the episode. I think there's so much here that you helped us unpack, and I feel like there's more avenues to discover.
Before we let you go, if anyone wanted to reach out to you, do you have social media stuff that you do? Do you have contact information that you'd like people to have?
Yeah, everything is on my website, nikkithedeathdoula.com. I have a podcast on there. It's Good Grief with Nikki the Death Doula. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I'm not frequent on social media, but I have those as well. And on my website, I've got resources. I've got workbooks. I've got stuff you could download, all sorts of great stuff there. So it's all on nikkithedeathdoula.com. And you can email me through there as well.
Thank you so much, Nikki, for joining us on the show today. It's been a real pleasure.
You are so welcome. Thank you for having me.
Well, listeners, I don't know about you, but that conversation with Nikki really resonated with me. And I have the benefit here that we usually record these interviews and then we go off and live our lives and then we come back and do the intro and the outro. So what's been cool for me is letting some of what she said kind of sink in a little bit. And one thing I remember her saying during the interview that subsequently played out in my own life is that we carry grief with us like for the rest of our lifespan. And then it's not the grief that like goes away or we quote unquote like get over it. It's just that our relationship to it changes. And this really hit home for me because I recently went back home to Chicago to help my almost 90-year-old mother move from her house into an apartment. So she's downsizing out of the house that she and my father lived in for decades and decades. And it's in the town that I grew up in, but it's not the home I grew up in. So I didn't really think I would have any grief about it. I'm just helping mom move. It's a big transition. But I noticed when I got home that when I got back here to Boston, I still felt like unsettled. And there was something that just kind of felt heavy and I just felt out of sorts. And so after a few days of getting back into my routine, I was doing a guided deep relaxation and everything just finally got quiet because there was so much in my brain of just processing. Things got so quiet and just this wave of grief came up that I was helping her move out of the house that was the last house I had ever seen my dad alive in. That was like the last, I associate that house with my dad always being in his office or sitting on his place on the couch. And I had this welling of grief that I was leaving that home and I wouldn't be able to walk back in that house anymore and just even be in the place where he had lived. And I feel like grief is like that. It's like these unexpected waves. So I was really grateful that I actually did a relaxation and the noise and chatter that was in my mind from all of the to-do lists from the move kind of quieted. And I could actually feel that emotion because when I felt it, then it lifted and I felt so much better. But I think had I not slowed down and stopped and done a guided relaxation, I might have still just been feeling out of sorts, even for a few weeks and never known why. And I think it was listening to her, slowing down and stopping, and it gave me the opportunity to actually feel it. So I just wanted to share that I think it's a sign of healthy grieving. If you're still thinking about someone who passed, particularly if it was a catastrophic loss due to an aviation accident, you're not alone and you're going to feel it for a long time and it's going to come and go in waves. And usually when you least expect it, it will pop up. So if you're feeling out of sorts with something, I think it's worth investigating. What's going on under the surface there? I know it helped me to just let myself feel it and then it moved through.
That beach ball right below the surface that she talked about.
Exactly. In the busyness of life, right? I was just pushing it on down. I was focusing on mom. And as soon as I could focus on something else, boop, there it popped up. There it was, the grief beach ball. So pilots, John and I want to encourage you, think about grief you have in your life, or maybe you know someone who's grieving. Share this podcast with them, share Nikki's information with them. Just ask someone, hey, how you doing? It can go a really long way. And to that end, we did touch on journaling in the interview with her. And Nikki, after the show, she shared a PDF of journal prompts with us. And what I really like about it is that it reads like a mental health checklist. These prompts are really clear and tangible, and I could see that they would cut through emotional clutter and help us move through the grieving process. For example, she has one that says, what do I tend to reach for when I want to avoid my grief? What happens if I imagine setting that aside, even for a moment? For me, it would be sugar. I know when I start craving sugar, it usually means something emotional is happening. She has another one that says, if my grief could speak, what would it say it needs most from me today? Those are things I don't think we ask ourselves very often. I certainly don't sit down and say what do I need most today? It's more like, what do I need to get done? What has to happen? How am I going to be successful? I love her questions because they're very clear. I don't think it would take a lot of time to journal through these, but I think it could lead to some interesting discoveries. So she has shared this with us. I will make sure that I include a link to that in the show notes. You'll find that in the bonus section of our website, which if you haven't seen that, all the bonus episodes are there in one place for you. I'll include that there. And I will also include the links to her podcast and all that good stuff as well.
Yeah, and everything can be found at calmcockpit.com. And then you'll also see the links to the bonus episodes that she's talking about. And then you'll also be able to find all of those bonus episodes in just the general podcast feed. So look for them there as well. And aviators, if this conversation resonates with you, we'd love to keep it going. Drop us an email at calmcockpit@gmail.com, especially if you have other resources that we can share with pilots and future topic ideas. We'd love to do this so that we can share these resources and help pilots along the way.
Absolutely. And if you have been enjoying the show, please drop us a 5-star review on any platform that you use. These 5 stars go a long way to helping other people know about the podcast and letting people know, yes, it is a helpful resource for your flying life. And if you are so inclined, please write us a review. This all helps us to help one another. We are truly all in this together. Grief is a heavy topic, but as my husband always says, a problem shared is half a problem. So I love that we're bringing this topic to light. We'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections on it. Where else can the folks find us, John?
Well, they can find us on any of the social media platforms out there, whether it be Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn. We have a YouTube channel, although it's not as populated as it probably could be. You can find us there at Calm Cockpit, sometimes Calm Cockpit Podcast, and we'd love to see you guys there. And thank you so much for the support for the show and for the things that we're putting out. We really appreciate having all of these important conversations with you all. We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have, and until next time, fly smarter
and stress less.
Airbus Air 1 departure is Airbus 321, traffic holding crossing runway 33 left, 3 left.